This audiobook was narrated by Victor Pauter. You can find me on youtube.com/Victor Pauter, where I make videos for aspiring manga and comic book artists. And now, Drawabox Lesson 1. Lines, Ellipses, and Boxes. Exercise 1. Superimposed Lines. The Superimposed Lines exercise is the first one I ever learned from Peter Hahn, probably before I even took his class, as he's shown it on a few YouTube videos as well. It is, however, important to note that while some of my exercises are based on what I've learned in the past, I'm not always employing them the same way, or with the same focus. Keep this in mind in order to avoid any mixed signals. When doing the exercise for Drawabox, follow my instructions even when they stray from Peter's own. When following along with him, do what he says instead. This exercise is pretty straightforward. As shown here, start out with a simple straight line with a ruler or a straight edge of some sort. Now, I want you to draw directly on top of that guideline and repeat the stroke freehand 8 times. Pretty simple, right? First, try it with a relatively short line of a couple of inches. Once you've done a few of these and feel more confident, double the length. As the stroke gets longer and longer, it will get more and more difficult. Also, try some arcing lines and even some waves, though the waves will definitely be very difficult. The purpose of this exercise. Every exercise has a specific purpose to it, and how you approach it is going to depend on what you're aiming to get out of it. In this case, this exercise is all about confidence. As you draw your superimposed strokes, you will notice that you're not going to be able to see where your pen is drawing because your hand will be blocking it. This will make it particularly difficult to guide the stroke as you go. Ultimately, that's the point. If you remember back to the lesson, you're not meant to guide the stroke as you execute it. You need to be pushing forward with a confident, persistent pace, trusting in your muscle memory and letting your arm do what it does best. Some students find that looking towards the endpoint can help in this regard. Below, you'll find a number of common mistakes I've seen from students over the years. Mistake: wobbling. A wobbly line, as shown here, suggests that you're hesitating and not quite giving up control. You're guiding your hand as you draw with your conscious brain, and it's course correcting as you go, as illustrated in this comic, and causing these wobbles. You need to trust in your muscle memory and allow your arm to do its job. This will result in what I call fraying on one end, like the fraying at the end of a rope where the different strokes are separating from the guideline, but this is entirely normal. It will reduce with practice and time, but for now it's something I expect to see and don't regard as a mistake. Mistake: fraying on both ends. As mentioned above, fraying on the far end is normal and expected at this stage. Fraying on both ends, however, suggests that you're not taking the time to position your pen correctly at the starting point of your guideline, and that you're just kind of winging it. The thing about confidence is that it's not without its preparation. We draw confidently because we've already done everything we can to assure success. This doesn't mean success is guaranteed, but that there is simply nothing else to be done and therefore no use worrying or hesitating. Example homework. Your end result will look something like this. Exercise 2. Ghosted lines. Ghosting lines is a technique I first learned from Scott Robertson, specifically from this DVD from years ago, and it's really become, at least on a conceptual level, the backbone of how I want my students to think. As you should be familiar with the concept of executing your marks with confidence, the ghosting method helps us to break the mark-making process into a series of steps that allows us to draw with the same confidence, while also improving the accuracy of our results. It also forces us to think and consider our intentions before each and every mark we put down. Planning. The technique starts with laying out the terms of the line you want to draw. In this example, we're going to focus on drawing a straight line, but this technique can and should be used for every single mark you put down. For this straight line, we're going to establish where we want it to start and where we want it to end, and we'll mark these points out on the page itself. Don't draw these points too heavily. Ideally, the resulting line should swallow both of them up. Rotating the page. Next, we want to find the most comfortable angle of approach for the line you've planned out, so feel free to rotate the page as needed. Personally, being right-handed, I find the most comfortable angle for me is drawing from left to right and away from my body at a roughly 45-degree angle. I do get a lot of students who fight against this and insist on trying to draw lines at any angle. It's admirable, but it very much gets in the way of things. To be blunt, that's not where we're going to be spending our energy. We're going to focus instead on really nailing one line, drawn from the shoulder from one angle of approach. We're going to focus on making it confident, smooth, and accurate. The thing is, the actual range of lines you can draw comfortably will expand naturally as you continue to practice, simply because as human beings, we are lazy creatures. That laziness means that rotating the page is kind of annoying, and so if the line we want to draw is only off from our range of comfort by a bit, we'll probably just go for it anyway if we're not forcing ourselves. And so, bit by bit, that range expands. That's not permission to be lazy, mind you. I expect you to rotate that page for each and every line, to apply every step of the ghosting method from here on in, so long as you're doing work for the Drawabox lessons. Outside of that, however, is no longer my jurisdiction, and you're free to do whatever you like. Ghosting. Both rotating the page and ghosting over the line make up the preparation phase of the three-step process. Ghosting basically means going through the motion of drawing your line over and over without actually touching the page. You engage your shoulder muscles just as you would if you were actually drawing the mark, and in doing so, you gradually build up muscle memory. I like to think of it as though this is the point where the brain is giving your arm its marching orders. The brain has done its reconnaissance. It has decided what needs doing, and now it's giving the arm explicit instructions. This is the last step that is going to involve the brain in any fashion. Don't rush through this step. It may take some time to develop a comfortable awareness of the motion you're repeating. Note, while ghosting, do so only in one direction. Don't go back and forth. Execution. Once you feel comfortable with the motion, without missing a beat or breaking the rhythm of repetition, lower your pen to the page and go through the motion one more time. Just once. Don't make more than a single mark, as you don't want to get into the habit of automatically reinforcing your strokes by reflex. In all likelihood, your first few attempts won't go well as you continue to get accustomed to the technique and ultimately find a rhythm and pace that fits. That's entirely normal. Also worth thinking about is the fact that there are several levels of success with this exercise. Level 1. Line is smooth and consistent without any visible wobbling, but it doesn't quite pass through A or B due to not following the right trajectory. It's a straight shot, but misses the mark a bit. Level 2. Line is straight, smooth, and consistent without any wobbling and maintains the correct trajectory. It does, however, fall short or overshoot one or both points. Level 3. Line is straight, smooth, and consistent without any wobbling. It also starts right at one point and ends exactly at the other. Take it one level at a time. Don't worry too much about the goals of level 3 if you're not yet nailing level 1. The purpose of this exercise. This exercise is intended to introduce you to a technique that you will be using on every single mark you make through all of the Drawabox lessons and hopefully beyond. The goal is to, over time, develop a habit of thinking before you draw, to consider what purpose the mark you're about to make serves and whether or not it is the best mark for that purpose, or if another existing one is already accomplishing the same task. And of course, to ensure that you're as prepared as you need to be to make that mark, rather than rushing in half-cocked. Mistake. Wobbly lines. If your lines wobble like this one or show any kind of wavering, then there are two main possibilities as to what is happening. You're hesitating as you execute the line, rather than drawing with a confident motion. Finally committing to a mark can definitely be quite daunting, but it's integral that you get used to accepting that mistakes do happen. Things go wrong. You can prepare as much as possible, and you should, but the moment your pen touches the page, any opportunity to avoid a mistake has already passed. Now you must commit yourself, push through with confidence, and execute your line. It is also worth remembering, we can still work with a line that is smooth and even, but there is not much that can be done with a wobbly one. You're drawing with your wrist rather than your shoulder, and have to reposition yourself as you draw due to the limited range of motion. These lines should absolutely be drawn from the shoulder, because they rely heavily on achieving a smooth, consistent flow. It could very well be both, so take a step back and analyze your approach before settling back in and trying again. Mistake: arcing lines. While this can be related to not drawing from the shoulder, and the smaller arc of motion forcing you into an arcing line, some people will find that they have a natural tendency to arc their lines slightly when attempting to draw one that is straight. One approach I've heard to correct this is to consciously arc your lines slightly in the opposite direction. The expected result is that this conscious adjustment will compensate for the issue and will result in a straight line that does not arc in either direction. Over time and practice, your brain will associate this motion with a straight line, and eventually you won't have to be quite so conscious of it. Example homework. Basically, you just need to fill a page with straight lines using the ghosting method. How you do this is up to you. As shown below, I've filled the page with points and then drawn lines between them. Don't worry about letting them overlap or things getting cluttered, it's all perfectly fine. What's important is that you're putting the time into the ghosting method for each and every line you produce. Exercise 3. Ghosted planes. This exercise is an extension of the previous one. You'll find that we often build on previous concepts in this manner, first presenting an idea, getting some experience with it, and then twisting it to make it just a little more challenging and giving you a little more to think about. Just like with the ghosting exercise, we start out by planning our marks. Here, we're doing so for more than one line at a time. We want to produce some kind of quadrilateral. Don't worry about making all the edges the same length or anything like that. Just place the 4 points on the page wherever it feels right. For each pair of points, rotate your page to find a comfortable angle of approach. Ghost through the motion as much as is needed to feel comfortable, and then execute the stroke with a confident, persistent pace. No hesitation, no thinking about the plane as a whole. Focus only on the mark you're making at that moment. Some students get too caught up in the big picture of what they're doing, and they lose track of the individual actions. All that matters is what you're doing now, as you make this single mark. To add some more practice with ghosting, go ahead and construct lines between the corners of our plane. Finally, let's bisect the plane in both dimensions, drawing a cross through the center of the X we created in the previous step. Now, for those of you who've tackled perspective before, you might start fussing over things like, how do I know my cross is centered along each edge of the plane, and other concerns. For now, this exercise has nothing to do with perspective. It's just a bunch of lines on a flat page, nothing else to worry about. For any common mistakes, you can look at those listed on the Ghosted Lines page. The purpose of this exercise. This exercise is about applying the ghosting method to something slightly more complex than a single line. There will be a similar jump when you get to the boxes section, and have to worry about applying this technique to three-dimensional forms. I frequently see students who are used to putting a certain amount of time in per unit of work. In the line section, 1 unit of work is 1 line. In the ellipses section, 1 unit of work is 1 ellipse. Finally, in the boxes section, I'm sure you see where I'm going with this, one unit of work is to them one box. But that is not correct. A box consists of several lines, so a box should be equal to as many units of work. This planes exercise has you tackle something that consists of many lines, while also putting the time and focus in for each individual stroke in order to ensure that it is done as well as you can manage. It also takes certain aspects of the ghosting method and spreads them out. For example, in my demonstration above, we lay out all 4 points for the plane before even drawing our first line, fleshing out our requirements early. Similar approaches can be used when drawing things like boxes or other more complex forms. Example homework. Here's an example of how you might lay out your page. Try to include a variety of sizes of planes and interlock them similarly to this so you can take advantage of all the space the page has to offer. Getting more advanced. This bit here is not for those of you going through the exercise for the first time as part of your Lesson 1 homework. As I mentioned in Lesson 0, once you're done with a lesson, you'll continue practicing these exercises as part of a regular warm-up routine. This exercise is especially good for warm-ups, and I generally recommend doing it over the simpler ghosted lines exercise for obvious reasons. It's the same thing, but with more purpose to it. On top of that, however, it's a particularly versatile exercise that can be modified to start incorporating perspective concepts as well. While at its most basic form, I don't want you worrying at all about perspective. As you move forwards through the lessons, you can start to envision these planes as being three-dimensional rectilinear surfaces. That is, each plane represents a rectangle or a square floating in space. The third and fourth steps, where we construct the diagonals in the cross, can be treated as being a subdivision of the plane. The X to find the center of the plane in 3 dimensions, and the cross to bisect it. The cross will of course require some estimation to find the center of each edge in space, but it's a great thing to practice as you move through the rest of the Drawabox lessons.